Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to tell you about all of the books that I read in January. This was easily one of the best months I've ever had in terms of reading the volume of books and also just like the quality. This is one of the stacks. This is another stack. And also I have, oh god, many others that I don't actually physically own. So I'm going to tell you about a bunch, oh god, yeah, that was inevitable. And I'll start off by telling you them in chronological order because I could not actually rank a lot of these books. I think I found some favourites of the year already, which feels insane, but I've honestly had just the best reading month ever. Although there is a couple that I did not love as much, and we will get to those as well. So let's start off with the first book that I read this month. This I'd already started in December and I finally finished it in January, and it is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This one is a cozy sci-fi read, and I absolutely love Becky Chambers' other duology which she wrote, which is the Monk and Robot duology, and this is another series. This is the Wayfarer series. So in this book you're following Rosemary, and she has kind of a mysterious past at the beginning of this book, but she needs to get away from home and she finds a job on this ship called the Wayfarer, and basically she joins this quite small crew, and this small crew is made up of this really diverse set of characters all from different places in the universe. And basically the Wayfarer spaceship, their job is to make these black holes basically, so they have to travel from one end of the galaxy to another and make these black holes so that people can travel instantaneously or much quicker through these black holes. But when Rosemary joins, they get offered this big job, and it means that they'll be on this journey for a very long time, and they're going all the way to a small angry planet. This book is great if you like cozy stories, if you like cozy sci-fi, if you like exploring various different characters, if you like that kind of full cast setup, because although you are following Rosemary primarily, you really do jump around into so many different characters' heads, and I really like that personally because you really find out a lot about all the different characters. This one I gave 4 stars. I really enjoyed this, and I'm definitely carrying on with the series. My only slight negative for this story is that perhaps we didn't get enough time to have an actual kind of character arc for the characters themselves. Like Rosemary herself, I guess, gets one, but I feel like we spent a lot of time with these characters and you're more just like revealing things about their past than going on a little journey with them. That's not the case for all of the characters. Some of them do have a turning point or a character arc, but I just feel like I wanted a bit more perhaps growth with the characters, but I guess that is what the rest of the series is doing and why I'm going to definitely be carrying on with this series in the next book. The next book I read was The City of Stardust, and this is a mysterious lyrical fantasy. It's one of those books that is more about the vibes than the plot, but it involves a family curse and doorways to different worlds and different dimensions, a city full of scholars, gods that are kind of on this revenge path. And this one for me didn't quite work. It is in no way a bad book. I just think it's not perfectly aligned to my reading tastes, because I think that when you have a slower, more lyrical, vibe-centered book, then I really want to feel involved in the world, and I just didn't quite get that with the world building of this book. I do think that if you really like Erin Morgenstern's writing, if you like The Night Circus, and if you like The Starless Sea, definitely pick this one up because it's very similar in tone and in vibe. But just for me personally, I did not love it. After that, I read The Last Graduate, and actually this month I finished off the Scholomance series. And this series you're following Elle, who has basically had a prophecy told about her when she was born. Oh my god. So I didn't realise I zoomed in for that entire thing that I was just talking about, but I really, oh my god, it's zooming again. Stop zooming. Hold on. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was zoomed in for that whole thing, but I really don't want to go through and say all of that all over again because I've literally forgotten what I was saying. This is why you should write a script for videos, but I don't know. Should I just say that again? So these books are a take on the magical school setting, but imagining that the school itself is trying to kill its students, because basically in this world, magic users are not safe, especially magical children. And if they stay with their parents, they have like a 50-50 chance of survival. But if they go to this school, then their chances of survival are much higher, but it's still a very dangerous place. And you're basically following Elle, who has, when she was born, she was given a prophecy about her that is basically that but she'll grow up to be some incredibly evil sorceress and she's going to destroy the world as we know it. And she is fighting against this prophecy basically every single day. These books, I was just so obsessed with the absolutely immaculate plotting and character journey and world building and magic system. Just everything worked together so well that just carried me through these stories. I became completely obsessed with these characters, and I'm not going to go into the plot obviously of the second and third book, but just if this is your genre, if this is anything that you're interested in, then please pick these up. These are the best young adult books that I've read in such a long time. But we've gone from one of the highlights to then one of the lowlights, because the next book I want to talk about was probably my most disappointing book, well, definitely of the year so far, and that book unfortunately is The Atlas Complex. This is a advanced reader copy and I read this just before it came out. I actually did a vlog, so if you want to know my detailed thoughts on this book, then that is there for you. But this one was just so incredibly disappointing to me. If you're not familiar, The Atlas Complex is the third and the final book in the Atlas 6 trilogy. I read the Atlas 6 a few years ago and absolutely loved it, and then the Atlas Paradox is the second book and I was 50-50 on it, and then I read this book and I really did not like the Atlas Complex at all. These books are dark academia and they are very much character studies, and the focus of the book is the relationships between these characters and the kind of toxicity and the love and the hate and everything wrapped up in these very ambitious, very morally grey characters. And I think essentially where this book fell down hugely for me is that we were not focused on the characters anymore because they weren't actually physically together for a lot of the book. I also think that a lot of things that have been built up and been made a big deal basically had no payoff, and it was just an incredibly unsatisfying ending to a series that started off, in my opinion, so well and so beautifully. I think with Olivie Blake's writing, a lot of the time she goes for crafting a beautiful sentence, but often that sentence doesn't actually have the meaning behind it. So for me, it has no emotional impact. Even though the sentence itself might be crafted beautifully, it's not going to have any kind of emotional impact. Instead of having any kind of character arc, even a negative kind of revenge or villain corruption arc, instead of that kind of thing that I thought we would be expecting in this last book, actually what you have is just like a dissolving of the characters that were already there. By the end of this book, I cared about literally one person, one and a half, I think. If you have read this book, the only person I did care about was Gideon, and I just really did not care by the end, and I thought that it was just such a disappointing and unsatisfying end to a series. I think if you're like me and you didn't really love the second one in the Atlas 6, then probably just give this one a complete miss. Next up, I did a buddy read with my friend Alice, and we read Nemesis by Agatha Christie, who is the queen of crime and detective fiction. We do these buddy reads quite often, and this one is one that we hadn't read yet. This is Miss Marple's story. I do think personally that this one was not my favourite of her books because this is quite a lot later than some of the earlier Miss Marples, and we both kind of decided that this one was just not really up to the high standard that we were used to for Agatha Christie's detective fiction, and that's for a lot of reasons, but also there were often just a few lines in this that came up and I was like, oh, I don't know. The mystery itself is still fun, and it's still fun trying to kind of figure them out, but this one we did not enjoy nearly as much as previous ones we've done. Next up, we have another absolutely amazing read, another beautiful book that I've just enjoyed so much this month, and it is Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands. And I absolutely loved Emily Wilde, the first book, which is Encyclopedia of Fairies, and then I read this one this month and I absolutely adored it as well. I read it really quickly. If you liked the first one, the second one is just as good, and honestly just the exact same vibes that I wanted over again. So these stories are cozy, romantic fantasy, and when I say romantic fantasy, I mean definitely not any type of spicy fantasy. It's very sweet, it's very whimsical. Basically in these books you're following Emily, who is a very excellent scholar of fairies, and you're reading Emily's journal entries as she is unravelling the mysteries of the Fae. This is a similar setup to the first book, where Emily and Wendell, who is her rival, friend, lover, person, they go to a new new location. They stay in this isolated village and they are trying to unravel a mystery that is going on. Honestly, the thing I love the most about these books though is Emily herself. I just love her as a character. Her sense of self comes across so strong because I think you're reading her actual journal entries as well. It's just such a fun medium, a way to read the story. But also I just love her determined nature and how she is so headstrong and so clever, and she's always using her mind and her scholarly skills to get out of different situations and scrapes. And I think in this one especially you have two extra characters who are along for the journey as well, and I really liked the dynamic that they introduced to Emily and Wendell's life and quest. So I absolutely love this book. Cannot wait for the third book. Would read infinite amounts of books in this series, and if you haven't already picked these up you definitely should because they are so good. So this was actually a very fantasy heavy month because the next book that I read is one that I've been meaning to read for so long as well, and I'm finally glad that I actually read it and finished off this series. But it is Assassin's Quest, which is the third book in the Fawcett trilogy. And I'm also realizing how many trilogies I'm finishing off this month as well. I feel very accomplished. So the Fawcett trilogy by Robin Hobb is a very classical, old school fantasy. You are following Fitz, who has grown up a bastard and has been trained as an assassin, and he lives in his father's court. I really did think this book is excellent. I think Robin Hobb is an excellent writer and her world building is unparalleled, and also her character writing. You feel so deeply enveloped in Fitz's life and all the other characters surrounding him. But honestly, my reservation about this final book especially, but also kind of the series in general, is that there is a lot of filler time. There's a lot of time that nothing is actually progressing for the plot, and because this is the third and final book in this series, there's a lot of things that are really built up and these breadcrumbs that are left, and you think that there's going to be this huge big finale where all of these things are accumulating and coming true. And I don't want to get too specific obviously with the kind of things that I'm talking about, but you're really expecting quite an explosive and exciting ending. And to me, because this book is almost 800 pages, this book is over 800 pages, I was expecting a lot of this entire book to be about that climax to this series. But honestly, the actual ending of this book I feel was really short. It was over very quickly, and then you have even quite a long epilogue style chapters as well after this big event. The actual kind of big event itself felt really rushed, especially after literally how many pages and how much time you're spending with these characters. This is an 800-page book. And it kind of leads on to my second point, which isn't actually a negative. I do genuinely think these books are a little bit boring, but I don't mean that to be in like a disparaging way. By boring, I kind of mean they are boring and kind of comforting, but you are literally spending a lot of time with Fitz in his everyday life, about how he is going to get food for that day, where he's going to sleep, his journey, his days are often very repetitive in what he's doing, and also his ultimate goal never actually shifts too much and you don't get that much new information. So honestly, the bulk of this book is very slow and boring, and it actually feels in a weird way quite comforting because you're feeling as if you are going on this quest with Fitz, and you do feel like you know him so well, down to how he would react in a certain situation. I could almost predict it before it was happening, but not in like a it's like predictable, in a way that you just really feel like he's a real person that you know. But I would honestly say that it's not that exciting because a lot of the exciting part of this book is very short. But I did not mind the boring parts either. It's kind of like the feeling of rereading something that you already know is going to happen, or like rewatching your favorite TV show, or something that's kind of comforting in that way, and also kind of boring, like kind of comfortingly boring. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but basically that's my review of this final book. I will be carrying on with Robin Hobb's other series. I think the next one that I'm going to be reading is the Madship Trader series, I believe. Let me know if you think that there is a better reading order for reading her other series. So switching gears slightly, the next book I've read is not fantasy, it's actually contemporary fiction, and it is The Real Deal by Devlin. And Caitlin is my friend over on TikTok, and she very kindly sent me her debut book, which is coming out I think very beginning of February. This book is about Belle, who when she is 12 years old, she gets the chance to go on this reality TV show with this very famous kind of dancer, singer, actress person who basically is training her and a few other young girls around the same age to be the next big star. This book really explores complicated friendships and different family dynamics, and also the toxicity of reality television. This book is really well written and it kept me reading because the pace of the kind of little reveals of different bits of information is done really well. You're basically bouncing back in time to when Belle is 12 years old, and then now when she's 26. She's looking back on her time on this TV show, and also they have asked her to come in for a reunion season, getting back together with the other girls, because basically in the very last episode of the 5th season of the TV show, when they were young, something very explosive went down, and you're trying to figure out what really went on and who's telling the truth, because there's a few different sides to the story. And yeah, this one was such a fun read and I really enjoyed it. I think if you like reality TV, and especially if you like the show Dance Moms, then you will really like this book. Next up, we have another absolutely amazing book that I managed to read this month. I've just had the best reading month ever. But this book was actually for my friend book club, and this was my friend Hannah's pick, and it was The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. And I had a feeling that I would like this book because I really liked Demon Copperhead by the same author, but little did I know how much I would absolutely love this book. And I actually had to read this really quickly because just for some reason I was so behind with the book club book, and I had to read it in about 3 days. And as you can see, it's not a short book, but I thought it was going to be such a challenge, and I ended up absolutely loving this book. Basically, you are following Nathan Price, his wife, and his 4 children, and he's taking his family on a Christian mission to the Congo in 1959. So you are following the perspectives of the wife and his 4 daughters and their experience coming from Southern America to the middle of the jungle in the Congo, and you jump from perspective to perspective through all of the different daughters and the wife, but you never actually hear from Nathan Price himself except through the eyes of his family. And oh my god, this book, it's so hard to describe why this book is so beautifully done, but I just absolutely love Barbara Kingsolver's writing. It is one of those books that's just about so many different things. It's about family, dysfunctional family, it's about growing up and identity and finding your place in the world. It's about good and evil and the battle between them, and somehow it's both funny and also completely heartbreaking. But the thing that I liked the best about this book is just how it shows human nature so beautifully, because you are following these people throughout many years in their life. One thing I just absolutely love is when authors can show a character as a child with their childhood traits and childhood flaws and personality, and then as you follow them throughout their life and they are shaped by different experiences, their personality becomes kind of calcified, and they can either be redeemed from their flaws or their flaws become an even bigger part of their personality. And I just loved how that was so well done in this book. This is honestly such an incredible read, and I'm so glad that I finally read it. So next up, I managed to read a classic book this month, which is Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. I actually read this as part of a 24-hour reading challenge vlog, which I will tag up here if you want to see that, because I obviously go a lot more in depth into my thoughts on this book. Essentially, I was quite intimidated by this book for a long time, but I really feel like I don't know why I was now. I think because it's just one of the big Russian classics, and I haven't read that many of them. I've read Anna Karenina before, but I think that's the only one that I've read, and I do find them quite intimidating to go through. But honestly, this book is actually really engaging, and basically as soon as you start, you'll be kind of pulled along into the story. But essentially, this book follows Raskolnikov. I'm probably saying that completely wrong, but he is a young man and a student, or he used to be a student, he's actually just dropped out, and he basically is coming up with this theory about crime and punishment. And then one day he decides to test his theory in real life, and you basically follow him as he goes out, he commits this crime, and then you follow his punishment, and then you follow his psychological unraveling as this crime catches up with him. If you, like me, thought that this book would be more of a trial-based book, I don't know why I thought it would be going in. I thought it would be very much like a courtroom trial drama. It's very much not. It's a very psychological book, and it's a deep study of this idea about one man who thinks that he is above the moral laws about crime and punishment in human society and what that does to him psychologically. I really enjoyed this book a lot more than I thought it was. I actually read it a lot quicker than I thought I would as well, and I'm really glad that I kind of pushed myself to do it in a 24-hour vlog as well. So the next book that I managed to read was a book that I've wanted to read for actually ages, and I finally picked it up, and it is The Last Unicorn. So this is the book that the cartoon movie was based on, that I absolutely loved as a child. I was obsessed with that movie because I believe that this was actually a republication, that it was actually out of print for a few years, but now it is back being published. So this book is about a unicorn who one day overhears in the forest two hunters talking about how if this is a unicorn's forest, then it will be the last unicorn that exists because all the other unicorns have disappeared. And this kind of confuses our unicorn, and she decides to go out and try and find if she truly is the last unicorn. This is such a classic fairy tale feel. If you really like those traditional fable-like stories, then I think that you'll really enjoy this. It's somehow both funny and whimsical, but actually has also some quite dark and slightly harrowing moments in this book as well. I think just like a traditional fairy tale that often do have those moments of real darkness as well. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very, very sweet. I liked the writing. It's not a complete favourite book for me, but I'm really so glad that I read it. And after reading it, I rewatched the movie with my brother, which was just so fun. So next up, I actually read a graphic novel. Basically, my friend Fran had sent me volume 5 of Fence, and I hadn't read any of the other volumes. So I decided to read volume 1 of Fence, and I read this digitally, and this is just a really cute graphic novel, basically following these young boys, and they are going to a prestigious fencing school, and it's very much setting up a huge rivalry between two of these boys, and it turns out at the end that they are roommates. So I'm excited to carry on with this series because I've heard amazing things about it by so many people who become obsessed. So I'm planning on reading volume 2 very soon. The next book I read is another brand new release, and it is How I Won a Nobel Prize, and I got this as an e-arc on NetGalley, and I actually listened to it as an audiobook, and I think I would really recommend actually that you do listen to this as an audiobook, because I've seen some other reviews saying that the grammar and the way that it's written is quite difficult to read, but I did not get that experience because I was listening to it. This book is a really strange story. Basically, it's about this young woman, and she is a graduate student, and she is working, I think, on her PhD, but she is working on a theory about superconductivity, and she's trying to find basically a metal or a material that can be superconductive, and it's going to be this huge breakthrough in science. But at the beginning of the book, her mentor is sent to this island, and basically this island is home to this institution where all of these disgraced scholars and academics are sent. Basically anyone who has done something ranging from the quite criminal activity to just like frowned upon behavior. They're allowed to carry on with their research, and they're kind of still celebrated for all of their academic achievements, but they're also not really allowed to leave this island. And she decides that she's going to follow him there, so she has to go to this island, and she also brings her husband. And this book I was in really two minds about, because parts of it I was really enjoying reading. I think that the main character's complicated relationship or complicated perception of politics was really interesting to read from, especially because you're also following her husband, who is in the process of being quite radicalized throughout this story as well, and that is in harsh contrast to her, who is really quite forgiving of her mentor and all of the slightly immoral things that he's been doing. I really liked that aspect of it, and I did enjoy the very unusual setting of the book, of this institution on this random island, but I do feel like it wasn't quite used to its full advantage. I was also kind of surprised by the very explosive ending of this book. I feel like I don't know, I wasn't like built up to it, and it like came out of nowhere for me. But that's not to say I didn't really enjoy it. So I'm still kind of two minds about this book. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Next up, I decided to, after reading the Emily Wilde books, I was trying to find some books that people have said are similar to those, and I heard about this series, which is A Natural History of Dragons, the memoirs of Lady Trent, and these are also light academia like Emily Wilde books are, so I thought I would definitely pick these up as well and see what they're about. And I really enjoyed my read of this book. So like I said, you're following Lady Trent, or as she's known in this book as Isabel Carhart, I think that's what her name is, and basically you're following her childhood, growing up, and her basically trying to desperately crack into the world of being an academic and a scholar of natural history, or like specifically dragons. So these books are a historical fiction as well, and I would say they're much more realistic than Emily Wilde type story, which is much more fantastical, because in this book Lady Trent is kind of working against the patriarchy in what she wants to do. Also, there is more of a class commentary going on with some of the characters in this book. Sorry, my phone died and now the sun is setting and I'm still not through all of the books that I read in January. This is why reading wrap-ups stress me out, because there's too many books to talk to in one video. But anyway, carrying on, I was talking about these books. Basically, I loved it. I can't remember where I got up to with what I was talking about, but this was such a fun book, and I've already bought the second book in the series and I'm definitely going to be reading it soon. I also saw a comment on one of my previous videos when I was reading this in a vlog. I think their username was review or something. If that was you, then sorry if I've just butchered your username. But they said that this series gets really good, or like even better on like the 3rd and 4th books, and that is kind of the impression I got also from this first book. I really enjoyed it, but also a lot of it was like, I think that I'm going to enjoy her as a main character much more as she just develops her kind of expertise and her personality, because like the things that kind of annoyed me slightly were her very naive view of the world, but not in the sense of like, I mean, naivety is fine, but in the sense of like, I was like, really, are we saying that to those people, that you're like coming into their hometown? And I don't know, if you've read the books you kind of know what I mean, but I think I'll enjoy this book even more as we go, this series more and more as we go along. So that is the Natural History of Dragons. And then the next book that we have that I want to talk about is the book club book that we did for January for the Reading Around the World book club. If you don't already know, then I do a Reading Around the World book club that I host over on the Fable app, and I talk about it a lot here on YouTube and also on TikTok. But in the month of January, the country that we did is Samoa. So the book that we read was They Who Do Not Grieve, which I keep calling Those Who Do Not Grieve. I don't know why I keep saying it like that. But this one was a very interesting book, and it's actually quite difficult to describe what it's about, because the way that I read the blurb is quite different to how I experienced the book. I think the easiest way to say it is that it's talking about 3 different generations of women in 2 separate families, and you're really looking at how one decision or action and their repercussions kind of go throughout the women's lives that were involved, but also their children and then their children's children. One of the families that you're following is full of women who are living not within the societal norms of Samoa. They are not married, they have boyfriends, and they might be just living in a non-traditional way. And then you're also following a family who have then left Samoa and they are living in New Zealand. This book though was honestly just a very tough read. Like the actual reading of the book was difficult because it's written in a very strange, very kind of hypnotic and lyrical way, but also in a way that you almost feel like you're reading riddles. Like perspectives will shift like that with no kind of warning, and just the way that it's written, you're kind of, I feel like you're always like one step behind the book. Found it actually really difficult to connect with, because I don't find that type of poetic writing the easiest to get into. I think I really would have enjoyed this book even more if I had a lot more context on the symbolism that it was exploring, because there was a lot of symbolism and mythology, and I imagine to be Samoan folklore as well, and I just feel like a lot of that symbolism was completely going over my head because I had no reference point for it. So this one was a tough read, but I do think that it definitely has its audience and it has its merits, but it just wasn't really for me. And the next book I want to talk about is also a graphic novel, and it's one that I started reading years ago and then have kind of fallen off reading it, but it's been recently come back from a hiatus. I say recently, I think in the last couple of years it's come back from a hiatus, so I've started reading it again, and that book is Saga. So I read volume 10 of Saga. This one is really hard to explain because it is a very expansive space opera sci-fi style story, and basically you're following this war that is going on between these people who have wings and these people who have horns, and basically it's following two people who fall in love from opposite sides of the war, and you're following the narrator of the story is actually their child, and then you're following that girl as she's growing up. These are like not for the faint of heart, and that gets more and more the case as you go through these stories, but they are beautifully told. I love how they're illustrated, and they are honestly like no other graphic novel I've ever read. They're one of the first graphic novels I ever got into, and I think for that reason, but also others, I just think they will always stand out in my mind as one of my absolute favorites. The next book I read was a really short little novella, and it's part of the Mead mishaps. What are they even actually called? The books that are basically by Kimberly Lemming, and the series that starts with that time I got drunk and saved a demon. But this is a really short novella, and you're following the original couple in that, which is Cinnamon and Fallon, who are, I think, probably my favourite out of the couples that I followed in this series. But this is a really short novella around a kind of Halloween event that's going on in the town. It's really cute. I just love how these are written. It's very spicy, so go in, you know, aware, but it's just sweet to be following that story again and that couple. And I will basically read anything that Kimberly Lemming is going to publish at this point because I'm just really enjoying how she does her romance. And then unfortunately we are ending on a bad note because the last book that I finished in January, which I finished just last night, is Come and Get It by Kiley Reid. And I was really excited for this book. Kiley Reid wrote Such a Fun Age, which I absolutely loved when I read it. I was really like obsessed with that book. And then I got sent this book, which is Come and Get It. I got sent it as a advanced reader copy that she had just come out now. But unfortunately, I was really disappointed in this book. And I think I was even more disappointed because I really saw kind of real brilliance in the writing. But overall, it was just absolutely didn't work for me. I rated it 2 out of 5 stars. Basically, this book is a campus novel and you are following a few different characters, but I guess you're kind of mainly following Millie, who is working as a RA in a dorm, and she's a slightly older student. She kind of took some time out and has come back, and she is basically working towards trying to buy a house. That's her ultimate goal. She gets this opportunity to set up some interviews for a visiting professor who is trying to write a book, or she says she's trying to write a book about weddings and money, and she's writing using kind of things she's overhearing in the dorms. She's writing about these young women, but basically, I really didn't like this book because for a few reasons. Firstly, even though we are centered in on Millie, I think that her reasons for wanting to buy this house like didn't really make any sense. Like, I didn't feel her longing or her need for buying this house, and then so like all of her mission to try and get more money to buy this house like didn't feel urgent to me in any way. And the other reason is every other character in this book other than Millie is just a terrible person, ranging on evil to like very immoral to like just slightly, oh, you shouldn't really like say stuff like that. Like, they are very selfish and self-centered person. Everyone's kind of on that scale apart from Millie herself, who's like a typical nice girl, I guess you could describe her as. Basically, I just feel like there was no running thread of plot throughout the whole story. You spend so much time in about 8 different characters' heads. You learn their detailed backstories, every single thing about them, but then it doesn't really like tie together and pull into some wider theme about the story, even though I know that the story was kind of trying to make a commentary about money and power dynamics and sex and desire. But I just feel like talking about those themes should be so much more interesting than it was. It was like a lot of the story was actually just really quite dull and quite disappointing. Now my memory is all filling up. This is the problem with doing long videos. My memory is now all full up. But basically what I was saying was there were some flashes of real humour, especially the dialogue. I thought that was actually really witty and really funny, and I wish that we'd had more time with that and it was more balanced out from the really incredibly boring aspects of the book. I know that Kiley Reid is a good writer as well, so that's why it was just quite disappointing for me. And yeah, I just felt like this was a very unsatisfying read, unfortunately. So that is the last book that I managed to finish this month. In terms of what I am currently reading, I'm very close to finishing this book, which is The Dance Tree. I'm about 70% through. This was actually recommended to me by Tasmin from Tea Books and Tasmin, who I mention quite often on this channel. I am reading it, but I'm also listening to it on audiobook. So like I said, I'm 70% through. It's beautifully written. It's a historical fiction and I'm really enjoying it, but I will talk more about this in my next wrap up. I'm also still, unfortunately, reading The Wheel of Time, The Crossroads of Twilight. I managed to get to 21%. And I started this month at 15%. So we have not succeeded very well with getting through that book at all, but whatever. So those are all the books that I've read this month. Oh my god, should we try and do it? So these are, no, falling. Ah! Oh my god. I should have just known that was gonna happen. This is not working. How do people hold these books? These are all the physical books that I managed to read in the month of January. Let me know if you have read any of these books yourself and what you thought. Okay. Bye. God. Okay, that is all from me today. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you have watched all the way to the end of this very, very long video. And I will talk to you again soon. Thank you. Bye.